name is Jessica Sweeney, and I'm here to summarize the 4 lessons what I have learned. That is how Bible came into existence and how we trust it. And everyone has a question that how did the literature came into existence? So the literature was first came from Mesopotamian civilization and the Egypt civilization, and then how did the Bible came into existence? So the Bible, as we all know, Bible was put together in one as a compilation. But before that, it was written in separate dates and separate years, and that was combined into one. But here, we all know how the Bible has come into existence. That is, first, we know that Moses has written the first 5 books, the Torah, and we know that how did the 10 commandments came. So it was from the stone. So do you think the stone was the first scripture where we started writing? Yes, you're right. It is from the stone. And since the stone was very heavy and it was easily breakable, they thought of they moved on to the clay. So since the clay would be very soft initially, so it would be very easy to write on it, unlike the stone. So then they slowly came into the papyrus, and then from papyrus they slowly came towards these scrolls. So the Bible was written across 1,500 years ago. So that was written in each of the material which I have listed out just now. And then in which languages Bible was written. So we all know there's 2 things in the Bible, that is Old Testament and the New Testament. And the Old Testament was written from Hebrew and Aramaic, and the Aramaic was partially written in the 2 books, that is Daniel and Ezra. And how come that Aramaic was written in how did Bible was written in Aramaic? Why? Because there is no particular, it is just it was first of all, the Daniel was written as Daniel was in the Babylonian city. So the Babylonian Aramaic was the official language, and that's how it was written. And few people say that because mainly the Daniel was written for the Gentiles, and that's why it was written in the Aramaic. And then it was said that Hebrew scriptures was lost. So somehow they had the Aramaic scriptures. So that's how they combined they included Aramaic into the Bible, Daniel and Ezra. And then what happened? Yes. Then how did we get Bible? So we all know that Bible was given, it has different versions of it. And how that each version has come from this, because it was written in Latin. From Latin they've written in Daniel. So we all know that each Bible has a different kind of version of it. And then how the scripture came, it was written in the first, it was a symbol from the symbols, and then it came from, they had 3,000 symbols, and it was a pictures. And then how did since it wasn't easily remembered, they gave a symbol for each of it, like A, B, and C, and D, and that's how the letters came. And there's 3 old versions of Bible that was. Has it lost? They know it hasn't, but it is preserved in Egypt and London. And before the scripture wasn't, they had no punctuations, there was no space, but it was written in upper limit alphabets, and it was continuation, but there was no difference between one word to another syllable. So that's how it was written. And somehow now the Bible, we see now every one of us, each home and each person has the Bible. So now how did Bible came? Everyone can read out. We cannot just blindly just listen to the sermon, but each of us have Bible, so where we can check whether what we have been hearing from our childhood to now, is it true or not, because each one of us have a Bible. We are holding a Bible. So now what I would like like to say that since we have a scriptures which is written from across the 1500 years ago, why do we use the digital one? So why don't we use the authentic one, that is a Bible which is written in the pages, and we could easily carry out the Bible. So each one of us have the holdings of a Bible, so why do we take the digital one? So I request everyone to use in the church to bring keep it aside. We give first preference to God. Why do you bring the digital one? But use the Bible which we have, which is in within us and which is in our.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. Today I will be talking about my learning from the past 4 sessions of the youth meeting. So the biggest question that we have asked is, what is the Bible? A simple question but with a very complex history. The Bible is one of the oldest books to have ever been written, and it was written across 1500 years, and it was mainly inspired by God. Now another question that arises is, what material was used to write the Bible, and what were the languages used while writing the Bible? Now we know that the Bible is mainly divided into 2 parts, that is the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now the languages used to write the Old Testament was Aramaic and Hebrew, whereas the languages used to write the New Testament was Greek. Now coming to the various materials that were used to write the Bible, we have materials like stone, clay, limestone powder that was placed on the stone, and then we had papyrus. Now, what was and how was writing done on materials like this? So writing on stone and clay was really tough, time consuming, and was very tedious, and it would take a long period of time to actually sit and write on it because you had to pitch on it. So basically what happened was, the first people who actually even started the concept of writing or noting down information were the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. So the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians started using stone, but then later on they decided that if I made an error or stone, and if I made a mistake in my grammar or spelling, whatever it is on stone, I have to restart my whole process of writing all over again. So then came across using lime powder on stone so that the errors can be corrected and they don't have to restart their work again time consuming. After all of this, they came down to using clay. Now using soft clay was much more easier than using hard materials like stone and then limestone powder on stone. Now clay being softer material, you didn't have to take huge tools and sit and carve and hitch on it. It was much more simpler, and correcting errors on clay was much more simple. After a couple years, they introduced a material called papyrus. Now papyrus is equivalent to modern day sheets, but you couldn't use modern day pens on it. There was a different ink that you had to use to write on these. So papyrus was used in something called as a scroll. A scroll is basically a 35-foot long book-like thing that you had to write on. It was a huge sheet and it was 35 feet long and 9 inches tall. The problem with scroll is, imagine carrying something that is 35 feet long and 9 inches tall. Very inconvenient. You cannot carry huge things like this from one place to another only to impart knowledge. So later on, scrolls were quickly replaced by scripts or something called as a codex, which is nothing but all these stones and clays compiled into thin sheets, and they were bound together like manuscripts. Now manuscripts is basically something like a modern day book that is used. This made carrying the material or the information that you have compiled together from one place to another way more easier. Now the problem with this later on, instead of using clay and stone, we later on started using silver plates and gold plates and thin metal sheets thus it was easier to write on, and it weighed way lesser than having to carry stone tablets or clay tablets from one place to another. Now, the fascinating thing about the Bible is the Synoptic Gospels, which is part of the New Testament. Books like Matthew, Mark, and Luke are part of the Synoptic Gospels. Now, the one thing that astonishes me about the Synoptic Gospels is that it was written by different people and they encountered the same thing. Imagine people that live far apart and not know each other, but writing the same encounter. It is weird, but at the same time very fascinating. The thing about the Bible is that many people think it's not true, that it is a fake, or that it's just a story that is given out by someone. But if you actually read it, you figure out that many people have written the same encounter, the same situation, the same story over and over again, which is kind of really hard to believe. Because over the past few years, you see that many people have read the Bible, and now the old Bibles, the ones that were originally written on clay, stone, papyrus, now are in the forms of booklets in various different versions. So the thing about the Bible is that no matter how many people come and tell you or convince you that it is not true, you not even said that over years you have the same meaning, you have the same situation, you have the same encounter. Nobody in the Bible is ever told that Jesus has not come down, he has not crucified himself on the cross. By the end of it, all of us Christians have to know that there is a superior power who is higher than us, superior being, who is always looking out for us, love for us, and always hopes the best for us.
Good morning everyone, my name is Celeste and I'm here to summarize the first 4 sessions that we had in the youth meeting. The theme was how we got the Bible and why we should trust it. The Bible was written across 1500 years. In which the Old Testament was written in Hebrew and Aramaic, and the New Testament was written in Greek. In the New Testament, there were two books which are Daniel and Ezra. Parts of it are written in Aramaic. The earliest form of writing was stone, which was difficult to carry, difficult to write with, and you couldn't erase the mistakes on it. Which was then, and then it was developed into clay and then wood, and then finally we ended up with papyrus. This papyrus was then rolled to form scrolls which were 9 to 10 inches high and 35 feet long. These scrolls are difficult to access quickly, and we had to roll them up, which was difficult to do when we needed it quickly. So these scrolls were then developed into codex, which was either stone, clay, silver or gold plates made to form and flip like the modern day books that we have. There were 40 authors of the Bible across in both the New and Old Testaments, and the current Old Testament books that we have in today are derived from Latin Vulgate translations. There were manuscripts which are like the modern books we have today, and there were 2 types of them, which were uncials and minuscules. In the New Testament, there were 5,300 manuscripts. The stone, we stopped using the stone as it was heavy, difficult to write, and it was tedious to carry it around everywhere, just to spread out little pieces of information. Then we moved on to clay, which was easier to write with as it was soft, and then we would be able to rewrite what mistakes we had made, but it was still heavy and difficult to carry, so we moved on to and then we moved on to scrolls, which were lighter, but it was still heavy. So and then we made the plates of information, and then we bound them all together and made codex.
So, what is the Bible and why do you trust it? Okay, so the Bible is one of the oldest books to have ever been written over a period of 1,500 years by a number of authors. And these authors write about the history of Christianity. They write about God's teachings, God's miracles, Jesus' birth, His life, and everything. Now, how do we know that it's true? How do we know, like, is there proof that it's true? Or, for one, we know that it's God's word, we have to trust it. But also the other thing is that we see multiple authors writing about similar instances in the Bible, and this can't be done if like it's fictional writing, right? It had to have happened at some point for multiple people to write it. So this happens in the books of Matthew, Mark and Luke, where all three write about similar instances. Now, we also have historical proof and how writing itself came into being and stuff like that. So we'll talk about that. Now, how did writing come into being? So we'll first, as we did in class, we'll first talk about the materials used. So the first material used to write anything at all was stone, and people used to etch on it. Now, what are the disadvantages of it? How do you carry stone around? It's heavy, it's not easy to carry around, people take long to etch on it, and all of that. So those are the disadvantages. Now, the next was they started writing on clay. So you know, when you make clay, it's wet, and so they waited for it to semi-dry, and then they used to write on it and wait for it to bake or harden. And now, what are the disadvantages of that? Clay can break, you can't take it around, it takes long for it to dry, semi-dry, write on it, and then again wait for it to dry. Then the next thing that came was they used to lime wash stone and then write on it. Now again, it was still stone, so you still had to carry it around, it was heavy. And then came wood or the bark of trees, and they used to wax coat it and then write it. Now imagine carrying around logs of wood around the place. It's again impractical. Then next came metal sheets. Metal sheets, easy to store, but it takes long to inscribe on and all of that. So then came papyrus, which was genius invention at the point because it's now paper as we know it. And the material, the ink used to write was not what we use now, but it was still ink. You didn't have to like etch on paper or inscribe on it, so it was quite easy. And the form of papyrus was initially scrolls, but these scrolls used to be huge, as Uncle Richard spoke about, were like huge scrolls, and you'd have to like turn the scroll in order to read it, which was hard. And then came codex, which was in the form of pages and books sort of, but still big, and somehow translated to today into books of paper. Now let's talk about the languages used to write. We know that the Bible was initially written, the Old Testament was initially written in, no actually wait, language, how did language come into being? So initially icons were used, icons or symbols, and this was hard because imagine making sense of like 100 symbols. First of all, remembering 100 symbols, writing it, making sense of it, and I can't even imagine like making sense of like so many symbols today. So after symbols, the Semitic people created alphabets of some form, but at the same point, they used to write in like continuous sentences. So there was no break. You keep writing, and you don't know what word, you can't differentiate one word from the other. So then it shifted to words, and then translated from one language to the other, and now finally we have English. So what language was the Bible initially written in? The Old Testament. The Bible is divided into two parts, the Old Testament and New Testament. The Old Testament is written in Hebrew and Aramaic. Aramaic by the books that were written in Aramaic were Daniel and Ezra. And this was because Daniel lived in Babylon at the point, and he was addressing the Gentiles, he was speaking to the Gentiles, so he used their language. and then the New Testament was written in Greek. Now, ever since the text has been translated into multiple versions, and then King James contributed hugely by bringing it into a more readable format, closer to what we read today. And then, should I stop? Go on.
Stop, you have to say it's done.
Okay. Few more fun facts, not fun facts, just facts. Moses was the person who wrote the first few books of the Bible. There are 66 books in the Bible. There are 39 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New Testament. And we can now access the Bible at our fingertip on an app. So, thank you.
So as we know, the Bible was one of the oldest books in history, but it was one that wasn't written all together. It was written through different times by different people. It was written across about 1500 years. The first book was written around 1450 BC to 1400 BC, and the last book was written around 1900 years ago. So if you talk about how old the Bible is, you could say it's between 3400 years to 1900 years. If you're talking about the compiled and completed version, that would be close to 1900. But if you're talking about when it started to be written, that would be about 300 to 3400 years old. Now, as I said, there were many different authors, approximately 40 different authors. The first being Moses, who wrote the book of Judges, and then the last was John. Now, we know that the Bible is divided into two covenants, the first one and the second one. The first one being the righteousness of law, and the second being the righteousness of Christ. The Old Testament contains stories of creation. God made everything, including humanity, which He entered an eternal covenant with. And the New Testament, which details the life and teachings of Jesus Christ and His apostles, of course. Now, the first writings of biblical stories or encounters was during the Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations, but biblical stories originally was passed down orally before it was ever written. Now, as Hannah said, most of it was written originally on stone, which was through hieroglyphics. And then it was only the Semitic people that got some semblance of alphabets. Now, but as the years passed on, the language became easier to read, and the material was also easier to carry around and spread the word on. So since you went into a lot of detail, I'll just go quickly. First, it was the stones, which was etched, and then clay, which was also etched. But then it became lime-washed stone, then wood with a wax coating, and then thin metal sheets, which was mostly gold or silver, and then there was papyrus. But there was also a time when people started using leather and parchment, which is animal skin, because the king of Egypt banned parchment exports. That was a whole story. But most of it was written in scrolls, and the word was carried through mostly by scrolls. Now, scrolls, as Richard Uncle said, is 35 feet long, 9 inches wide, so it was really hard for people to read and carry around. But then came codexes, which is very close to what we have today as our books, which are thin sheets combined to a sort of manuscript. Now, as for the languages, in Old Testament, there was Hebrew and Aramaic, but Aramaic was only 2 books, which was Ezra and Daniel. Now, that at the time was because Daniel lived at Babylon, and Aramaic was said to be the official language at the time. Now, and of course, New Testament was in Greek. Now, fun fact is that there are over 770,000 words in the Bible. And I would actually like to end on a quote. I forgot the site, so forgive me. God arranged it so that all these authors writing history, poetry, eyewitness accounts, wisdom, and more over centuries and centuries stayed true to the narrative he desired. The Bible is truly the inspired word of God.
Good morning. Today I'm going to summarize youth Bible study that we have seen so far for the past few weeks. So the topic is how we got the Bible and why I trust it. Before knowing how we got the Bible, first point I just want to remember how did ancient people write and was writing invented before the Bible. So Bible was written across 1500 years and it was inspired by God. As we know that Bible was divided into two testaments, Old Testament and the New Testament. Old Testament was written in Hebrew and Aramaic, and Aramaic written books were Ezra and Daniel. New Testament was written in Greek. And next, the earliest known writings were Mesopotamian and Egyptian writings. Mesopotamians used clay tablets to write across 3000 BC, and Egyptian writings, they were written in a form called hieroglyphs, and this is a picture form of writing in which they used to write on temples, monuments and tombs, and this is based on a system of consonants. One more thing to remember here was Egyptians did not develop into alphabets. If not Egyptians, then who would have developed into alphabets? It's the Semites people. They are the descendants of Shem. Shem is the great grandson of Abe, who is probably called as the father of Hebrews, including Abraham. And at that time around 1750 BC, first alphabet was discovered. From that later all the alphabets were derived. Now coming to the second point, what are the earliest writing materials? As we know that the earliest known writing material was stone, because the 10 commandments were written on stone. The problem with stone is it is difficult to carry, transport, and very difficult to carve on it. So they have modified it to plaster on stone. It was easy to write but still difficult to transport and carry. Next material was clay tablets. They were also difficult to carry and transport, but still it is easy to write. And next material was wax coated on wood. It was easy to write, but still it is easily erasable, so this is the disadvantage with that. In those days they used metal sheets also to write, but those were very expensive and it is mostly used by the rich people. And the last material was papyrus, and it was grown in the banks of the river Nile in the Egypt. It's a flexible material. Actually at that time what happened is Eumenes II, the king of Pergamum, has decided to build his own library. At that time king of Egypt has stopped the supply of papyrus, so what they have to use, there is no papyrus, so they have shifted to leather and parchment. Those were the dehydrated skin of animals that was soaked in limestone. Coming to the third point, the early form of Bible. Bible was derived from the Greek word la biblia, which means the books. Papyrus rolls were made by gluing with each other, which is 34 feet long and 9 to 10 inches height. And how Old Testament began into existence, in the same way New Testament also came, but in a shorter period of time. It is around 50 to 100 AD. And at that time professional scribes used to be there in a place called scriptorium. They used to sit and write the original manuscripts, means they used to copy the original manuscripts, so that today we got all this one. So in a conclusion, I just want to conclude that we can see the work of God here to bring the Bible to us today that we have in our hands, so that we have to be very grateful for that. Thank you.